Hello, I'm Jeff Brannon. Been thinking through some deep things and just thought I would get them down on video, and hopefully it'd be helpful to someone else trying to wrestle through these big questions that life gives us. I'm here in my little makeshift studio in my RV, so hopefully the audio is coming across okay, but we'll see how it goes. So we all have come to different beliefs about all sorts of different topics that are important to us. Some of our beliefs are deeply held, and some are pretty shallow, depending on how important they are to us. But the topic I'd like to bring to the table is the beliefs we hold about the existence of God, an all-powerful creator. And I realize this is a topic that a lot of people had rather not discuss. To even think about topics so big can make your head hurt, for sure. So while I go through my little presentation here, I would love it if we could forget about religion for a little bit, or how you were raised, or all the different denominations and all that stuff. And I know it's not possible to separate ourselves from our experiences, but if we could try to think outside of those things, it may give us a different perspective, may be helpful. So I am convinced that every person that has normal cognitive abilities has at some point in their life questioned in their own mind and heart, how did we get here? How did all of this come about? Was there some master creator? And if so, does it really matter? That's one of the big questions. Some folks may even go on to ask deeper questions like, is this all there is? This here? Is there some existence after this life? That's deep. And the main body of the scientific community would tell us that the universe is nothing more than random cosmic events of matter and energy colliding, and those events somehow created this extreme order that we now observe through telescopes. Again, one may ask, does it really matter? Man, I'm just trying to pay my bills and get ahead, and just experience a little happiness here and now in this thing we call life. What difference does it really make? Well, the scientific community would also tell us that we are each a conglomeration of random cells and molecules that have evolved over time. And this is where I would like to present my first challenge to someone's beliefs. A belief that is very firmly held by a lot of people, especially those in the scientific community. And let me say, it's perfectly fine if you hold this view. You should have the same freedoms as anyone else to believe as you understand. Who in the world am I to tell you what you need to believe? That's totally up to you and you alone. That's wonderful. So here's my challenge. Let's say there was a group of archaeologists digging in a remote area, and they came upon this brass plate, and it had the word hello engraved on it. I don't believe there's anyone in their rational and sane mind that would say, look, this plate has evolved over millions of years. And why would we not say that? Why would a sane person not come to that conclusion? I believe it's because we know someone had to have created this. You immediately recognize there was intelligent design behind it. It had to have a creator. Somebody did this intentionally. Would we all agree with this? Would you guys agree that that's the case? I think we all would. Now, if we were to take a little child and put them up beside this brass plate and started comparing the complexities of each of them, I believe we would quickly conclude that the little child was infinitely more complex than the brass plate. Would we all agree on that? Again, I think we would, not sure. I think most people would agree on that. So you could take any aspect of this small child, the eyeball, for example, how it connects to the brain and allows comprehension of sight. That's a little more complex than the brass plate. How about the digestive system? Food is consumed. The body extracts all the nutrients to feed and regenerate cells. Then the waste that the body can't use is expelled. That's pretty complex. I would say we would all agree that's more complex than the brass plate. Now, if you were to reason through this stuff and came to your own conclusion that, yes, I see it. If there had to be a creator for the brass plate, because evidence exists of intelligent design, I guess it would stand to reason there had to be a creator for the little child as well, as we determine the child is more complex than the plate. So if the plate had to have one, I think we can deduct, because of intelligent design, that the child had to have one. We couldn't say that the brass plate had to have one, but the child did not have to have one. That's outside of reason. I don't think we would be reasoning well if we came to that conclusion. So, if you were to come to the conclusion that there had to be a creator for the little child, you are now a creator believer. A believer in a creator. And you may say, but wait a minute, that's not what I've been taught. That's not how I was raised. And that's okay. Just remember, for a little while, we're forgetting about all of that, of how we were raised or what we've been taught. For right now, we're in this little free zone where we can think or believe outside of those things. So we don't have to be constrained by those. So just think through it with me. And, if you didn't have all those beliefs, which is impossible for us to go back and undo. But here's what I'd like to start addressing. The question, does it all really matter? Because when you step over into this world of being a creator believer, you naturally want to ask, who is this creator? It's like, okay, if I now believe in a creator, I would like to know who this creator is. Now, when you start asking those questions, you step over into the overwhelming topic of the world religions. Wow. Who's got it right? Can anyone really know? How do you even begin to know the truth? Has this Creator revealed himself to his creation? We understand that every so-called religion have their own stories and legends that claim so, that their Creator has revealed himself to his creation. But who can know the real one? Because they all can't be real. It's not even possible. We're outside of reason now again, to me. Maybe there's someone that may think that, but I'm going to briefly share what and why I have come to believe what I believe. Obviously, you have no obligation to believe what I believe. That goes without saying. And thankfully, for now, we are free to believe whatever we choose to believe. Is that not a beautiful thing? It's just beautiful that we can believe whatever we want to. That's so great. It's like I have the freedom to choose what I believe. Man, it's amazing to me. And let me say, if you believe something different than what I present here, I would love to sit down and hear why you have come to believe what you believe. That's the only way I can come to a full understanding of all the different positions and topics. How else am I going to know if I stay in my little box, in my little world? I'm not going to have a full understanding. I'm going to have an understanding that exists over here. So I have to, branch out here. So for me, I have come to believe that the one true Creator is the one described and defined in the Hebrew Bible. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, I'll listen to anyone, anybody. I love hearing different views. I just want to know why you believe this or that. What's behind your beliefs? I need some evidence. Show me why you believe that. Help me understand why you have come to this or that. Don't tell me because that's what your mother and father believed. I need evidence. I am not a blind faith kind of guy. That's just not me. I'm not there. I realize all of us have to employ some level of faith for whatever we believe. We have to rely on sources that weren't our personal experiences. We weren't there. Unless we were the one that received this revelation, we've got to employ some kind of faith. I understand that. Whether it's evolution, the Big Bang Theory, the Book of Mormon, Buddhism, whatever. But with that said, I'm looking for real evidence. I don't want to believe in some fairy tale. I want substance behind my beliefs. Not just, that's the way I was raised. Think about this. There are so many different beliefs out there. I can't go on the hope that I won the lottery, that I was born into the family or culture that had the truth. Maybe I was that blessed, but I want to know it for myself. I want to own it. I need it to be mine to truly embrace it. Not something handed down to me through some rite of passage. That's just me. I know everyone doesn't feel that way, and that's perfectly fine. But when we're talking about things of this importance, I want to at least make the effort to understand what's true. So here we go. One of these prophets named Isaiah, who lived around 700 BC, wrote this in a book, quoting this creator that he believed in. And this creator says, I make known the end from the beginning. Now keep this in mind as I draw out this timeline. This creator claims that he created the world and everything in it in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh. I understand there's much debate whether this was 6 literal days, but we're not going there today. So here we are, day 1. He separates light from darkness. Day 2, he separates water from the firmament. Day 3, he supposedly creates seeds and plants. Day 4, he creates the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, he creates animals. Day 6, he creates us humans. And day 7, he rests. He sets it aside. Well, so there are cycles and patterns everywhere through what we call the scriptures, or through this creator's reasoning, the way he set it all up. I don't understand it all, but I know there are cycles and patterns that repeat themselves. So here's another one that holds this same pattern. But first, for this pattern here, this was the pattern for God, man, and animals. They were to work for 6 days, then they were to rest on the 7th. He even said, I want you to give your animals, your working animals, a break. So this was the pattern for God. It was his pattern. He said, I want it to be for you men and women, and I want it to be for you animals. So work 6 days, rest on the 7th. That's a pattern. So this creator chose a certain group of people to reveal himself to the world through. They were called the Hebrews, which means to cross over. And he referred to this group as his chosen people. We know them today as the children of Israel. So he chose a specific band of people to reveal himself to the world through. Through another Hebrew prophet named Moses, this creator tells this chosen people that he desires them to give the land rest, its own Sabbath. But this time, it's a yearly cycle, not days. So here we go, another cycle and pattern. So this time it's the land. You work, plant, and harvest. 1st year, 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year, 6 years on the 7th. He wants the land to rest. Wow. So here's another pattern that kind of matched the first one. But now the pattern for the land was to work for 6 years and then rest on the 7th. So that's the same pattern. Now, I am about to suggest to you that same pattern exists for the earth, the whole earth. But not in days and not in years, but in millenniums, periods of 1,000 years. So, here's the earth. We have the first millennium, toil and unrest. The earth is working, so to speak. Millennium 2, Millennium 3, 4,000 years, 5,000 years, 6,000 years, and the seventh is going to rest. The whole earth is going to have a Sabbath rest. Wow. So now we have this same pattern repeating itself, but not in days, not in years, but in millenniums. So the pattern for the earth was to work for 6 millenniums and then rest during the seventh. And I don't want you to think that I think that I've got it all figured out. I know I don't. There's more that I don't understand than I do. But it's just reasonable to me. It just seems to fit this pattern. It's a simple concept. It's not complicated, but I don't think I've got it all figured out. I can assure you that. So you say, Jeff, that's a lot of speculation there. Well, let's review what we know. Here's the things we know. Number one, we've had approximately 6,000 years of human history. Approximately. On this, the Bible and academia are in relative harmony. They both agree that the first civilizations were a Semitic-speaking people from a region called the Fertile Crescent, or the cradle of civilization, if you remember that from your geography class maybe. So here we've got the Fertile Crescent, and this is where most people agree that life started. And right here in this little spot, the center of the world, is where civilizations began, right here. So that's the first thing we know. We've had approximately 6,000 years of human history. Here's the second thing we know. The last 1,000 is going to be a period of rest. You say, how do we know that? Well, I'm referring back to the Bible, the prophets, that this Creator, those who believe these prophets foretold the future. And there's a lot of evidence that they did, and it happened. For anybody that wants to research, it's there. So these prophets predict that the last 1,000 is going to be rest. So there's 6,000 years of human history, last 1,000 years of rest. So these are things we know, or those who believe would say, yep, I feel like that's correct. All right, so there's a verse from one of these prophets or writers of these scriptures named Peter. And he says a very interesting thing, but do not forget this one thing. And by the way, in this context, he's talking about the end, at the end of days, the day of the Lord, when these things all come together in its fruition. So this is while he's talking about those things, this is a statement he inserts. But do not forget this one thing, friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. That's interesting. You know, we can't build a doctrine around it, but it certainly may be a little more information that adds to what we believe, based on other things that build around it. So that's interesting. So our current dating system is split into BCE, before the Common Era, which most scholars are using BCE now, and CE, the Common Era. So our current calendar in large part is from Julius Caesar, the Julian calendar. Then Pope Gregory XIII came along in the 1500s and made some changes. It was primarily to get Easter back falling after the spring equinox again, hence the Gregorian calendar we use today. And then comes along Dionysius. He was a monk who lived around the 500s in Romania. He was also a mathematician and an astronomer. And in 525, at the request of Pope John I, he prepared the chronology of the birth of Christ. So Dionysius, he's the reason we have BC, AD, or BCE and CE, before the Common Era and Common Era. He's the one that split this time. So based on his calculations, that's why we now call this 2021, that we're in 2021, based on these calculations. So what's very interesting is the Hebrews, they have their own calendar. They certainly, for economic reasons, use the Gregorian calendar also. But they are not acknowledging the birth of Christ, BC, AD. They're not going there. So they've been tracking years from the beginning. So their calendar just goes from zero, like way back zero. So guess what year it is on the Hebrew calendar right now? So right now it is 5782. So the Hebrews are saying that it's been 5,782 years since creation. Dionysius is saying it's been 2021 years since Christ. So who's got it right? Who really knows? I don't know that any of us could ever know for sure, but we do know that we're at basically somewhere at the end of the 6th millennium. It's there somewhere, even though if we don't know it. So just to take a really quick tour through 6,000 years of history, we've got the beginning. So this creator says that I created Adam and Eve, one man, one woman. They start procreating, and here we go in the Garden of Eden. Then about 1,500 years later, this creator supposedly floods the earth and basically creates a new beginning, a new earth, he calls it there. It makes the earth new. So that was Noah, as we all know. And then we have Abraham and Sarah. They come along. They're very important people in this timeline. Then we have this gentleman named Moses. I'm sure most people have heard of Moses. Then we've got some of the other more secular known things coming on the scene even before this. But here we've got King Tut in 1330 BCE. Then we've got King David. Most people know about him. We've got Daniel in the lion's den when this group of chosen people, Israel, were taken into captivity into Babylon, and he supposedly was put into a den of lions and they didn't kill him. Then we've got Alexander the Great, about 350 years before Christ. We've got Cleopatra, just some of these prominent figures. And we've got Buddha and the beginning and birth of Buddhism. We've got Constantine the Great. We've got Genghis Khan. We've got Columbus. We've got the father of our nation here, George Washington. And then we've got us in 2021. So there's a huge timeline of the last 6,000 years of human history. So, as I mentioned, Abraham and Sarah, this creator made covenants and promises with these two people. This is a very important portion of this creator's story if you're trying to figure out which one's true. So then they were old, past childbearing years, but God gave them a son named Isaac. These covenants and promises were passed down to Isaac, all of them. Just like they were given to Abraham, they passed down to Isaac. Isaac and his wife Rebekah, they had a son named Jacob. The same covenants and promises were passed down to him. Now, the Creator changed Jacob's name to Israel. So Jacob, or Israel, he has 12 sons, which we now know as the 12 tribes of Israel, the nation of Israel. So, remember I told you I'm looking for evidence. I'm looking for real evidence. I don't want to believe in a fairy tale. Here's one little piece of it that goes with our whole story here. This Creator told his people, this new nation, that if they didn't follow his instructions, he was going to let another nation take them captive. And they would be held captive for 70 years. Why in the world 70 years? Here's where it gets very interesting. This Creator told them so the land could enjoy her Sabbaths that they did not allow her to have while they were in the land for 490 years. So, you're like, what? This is craziness. Well, it actually happened. So 1,000 years later, what the historians now know as the Babylonian captivity, so the Creator tells Moses this, and then 1,000 years later, it actually happens. That's craziness. So here on 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. 516, the second temple is dedicated by Nehemiah. So exactly 70 years. And this evidence doesn't even scratch the surface of what's there. So back to the prophet Isaiah, when I told you, remember this, he says, I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning. I believe, as it was in the Garden of Eden, it's going to return. I believe there will be no sickness and no death, just like it was in the beginning, as it was before death, before they died spiritually and physically. I believe that's going to be heaven. That's where it's all culminating and going toward, is back to the beginning. Now, we live and think in a very linear world. We live in a world that has beginnings and ends. In God's world, there's no beginning and no end. I don't understand it, don't pretend to, don't have to. But we see it all around us. If you look up in the stars, it's all just a big circle that comes back to the beginning. It goes around again, it comes back. You look at our seasons, it's a big circle. There's kind of no beginning and no end. It's cycles and patterns is the way God works for some reason. What has been will be again, he tells us. And there's been one significant figure that I've left out on the timeline. And his Hebrew name is Yeshua. you probably know him as Jesus. But he's the one that split the timeline right there and kind of created the BCE and the CE, the Common Era. So many of these ancient Hebrew writers wrote about a coming king, a coming ruler, one who would save this Creator's people. So for thousands of years, this anticipated Messiah or anointed one has been expected to show up. I believe this specific figure, this Yeshua, the one who split time, was and is the anticipated one written about in these ancient writings. That's what I have come to believe. Again, some of us who need evidence, if we're willing to dig, we can find specific, detailed prophecies written down in these ancient documents foretelling historical events long before they happened, events predicted by different people in different geographic locations, in different time periods, with different backgrounds, predicting the same events. When you think about that, it's truly miraculous. Miraculous. How do you explain that? How do you explain different people from different regions, from different time periods, and their writings can be in harmony with each other? It's just mind-boggling. So it's written that he will make this Yeshua will make two separate physical appearances here on earth. The first is no longer in question. History gives us a detailed account of this first coming. The second is still to come. These writings predicting he will come again as a judge, a ruler, a king over the whole earth. So, all of this is prophesied that this is going to take place during this last millennium. And then a new heaven and a new earth where he will then rule forevermore, which is this place people refer to as heaven. Which brings me to my last point, the 7 major feasts of this Creator, which the West is not very familiar with. But you have Spring Feast and Harvest Feast that he gave to his children, his chosen people. So the Spring Feast were all pointing to his first coming. The Harvest Feast, are all pointing to his second coming. So, the first Spring Feast is Passover. Now, these people, this group of people that he had chose, had been keeping this particular feast for 1,500 years, almost 1,500 years. And then this Yeshua, who split time, who a lot of people believe he was the prophesied anointed one that was to come, he just happens to be crucified on the same day that these people had been keeping this feast for almost 1,500 years. It was just a coincidence that he happened to be sacrificed as they would do the sacrificial lamb, a Passover lamb. This true lamb happened to be on the same day. Wow, that's interesting. They had this other feast called unleavened bread, which represents being without sin. His body would not see corruption. It was all about him. And then you have the Feast of First Fruits. He ascended to the Father as he was resurrected, became the first fruits of those who would follow after him. Then we have the Feast of Pentecost, which was the giving of the Torah, Moses on Mount Sinai, and the Spirit to the disciples on the Feast of Pentecost. So all of these were pointing, they were all pointing to this Yeshua, his first coming. Now, the ones that have not been fulfilled are the harvest feast. The first being the Feast of Trumpets, Ram Teruah, the feast, the day of shouting, of blast. Well, there's a lot of different scriptures that refer to when he comes. You know, in these movies and things, when the king comes out, all the people, the trumpets blow, and it's like the announcing of authority, of royalty. I believe there's going to be trumpets, and this is the day that it's referring to, at the harvest, the end, the time at the end when he wraps it up. So next is the Day of Atonement, that comes shortly after that, when our sins are atoned for by this figure, ultimately atoned for. Then the Feast of Tabernacles, which means the true tabernacle will be here to dwell with men. He will tabernacle among us. So this is all the harvest time at the end. I believe these harvest feasts are all pointing to his second coming. I believe the spring feast were all pointing to his first coming. And this second coming is going to be when there's one judge, one ruler, and one king over the entire earth. So the end result is this. I am not here to get you saved. I just want to get you thinking. Your relationship is between you and this Creator and Him alone. But this is what I call my gospel presentation. Do with it what you will, but I think he is very clear that it is only those who seek him that will find him. So hopefully this has made some sense and gives you a little different way to process some of these big questions that life throws at us. So hope it helps. Thanks for watching.